My wife sat across from me at the breakfast table and told me I was no longer welcome at my own beach house for Christmas because I made everyone uncomfortable. I said nothing. I sipped my coffee and let her believe my silence meant surrender. Then at exactly 12:15 on Christmas morning, my phone rang. My son was sobbing. "Dad, there are federal agents at the door. They are asking about you." I stayed calm. After 35 years of opening human chests and restarting hearts that had flatlined on my table, I had learned that panic is a luxury reserved for people who do not understand the situation. I understood it perfectly. I had engineered it. But let me start from the beginning. Hello everyone. Take a moment to drop a comment, letting me know where you are watching from, so I know you are here with me. Also, a brief note. Parts of this story have been fictionalized to enhance the narrative. Any resemblance to actual names or situations is unintentional. But the lesson at the heart of it is completely real. My name is Franklin Caldwell. I am 67 years old. For 35 years, I was a cardiothoracic surgeon at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. I performed over 3,000 open-heart surgeries. I held beating hearts in my hands. I watched people die on my table, and I brought them back. I retired 2 years ago, not because my hands were unsteady, but because I had earned the right to rest. But I never stopped diagnosing. I never stopped reading the vital signs of the people around me. In the operating room, that habit saved lives. As it turned out, it would save my own. It was December 23rd. The morning sun was hitting the kitchen windows of our home in River Oaks, Houston. The light was thin and pale. The kind of winter light that makes everything look honest. Even the liars sitting at your breakfast table. My wife, Nadine, set her coffee cup down with a sharp sound that reminded me of the click of a surgical clamp. She smoothed the fabric of her silk robe, the one I had bought her in Milan, and delivered the verdict. "Franklin, we have discussed this as a family. It is best if you do not come to Galveston this year." The beach house in Galveston was not a modest cottage. It was a 5-bedroom property on the Gulf, with a wraparound deck and a view that could slow your pulse by 10 beats per minute. I purchased it in 2004, with the bonus from a year in which I performed 47 valve replacements without a single complication. It was my sanctuary. Now, my wife was telling me I was trespassing. I looked at her. Then I looked at my son, Jerome. He was 31 years old and was currently studying his scrambled eggs with the intensity of a man reading his own autopsy report. He could not meet my eyes. Then I looked at Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, 29 years old, and she possessed the kind of beauty that worked like anesthesia. It numbed your critical thinking. She was buttering toast with a precision that bordered on surgical. Everything she did was deliberate. And the purpose was never kindness. Why, I asked? My voice was steady. In the operating room, I never raised my voice. A calm voice commands more authority than a shout. A shout tells the room you have lost control. Vanessa answered before Nadine could. She offered me a practiced expression of concern, the kind of face people make when they want you to believe they are feeling something they are not. "Oh, Dad, it is not that we do not want you there. It is just that you have been so stressed lately. You make the children anxious. You create tension. We just want a healing Christmas." Healing. My son had not held a steady job in 3 years, but he needed to heal. Vanessa spent her days running a wellness organization that produced nothing but Instagram posts and expense reports, yet she needed to heal. And Nadine, who had not earned an independent dollar since 1992, apparently required a beachfront recovery program at my expense. Nadine finally looked at me. Her eyes were the temperature of surgical steel. "You have been difficult, Franklin. Last week was unacceptable. You humiliated Vanessa. You made Jerome feel small. We cannot have that energy around the people we have invited for the holiday." She paused. I saw the next word form on her lips before she swallowed it back. She was going to say, investors. She caught herself and said friends instead. But I am a surgeon. I am trained to notice the thing that does not belong, and that word did not belong at a family Christmas. I filed it away in the part of my brain where I stored anomalies. The same part that once caught a hairline crack in an aortic graft that 3 other surgeons had missed. I looked at Jerome. "Son, do you agree with this?" He shifted in his chair. He glanced at Vanessa. She gave him a small nod, barely perceptible, like a handler signaling a dog. "Vanessa has been really stressed, Dad. It is just one Christmas. Please do not make a scene." I nodded slowly. The way I nod when I have reviewed the scans and I know exactly where the blockage is. "Very well. I will not come. I hope you find the healing you are looking for." Vanessa smiled. It was a victory smile. The smile of a woman who believed she had just removed the last obstacle between herself and the vault. They finished breakfast in a rush. The energy shifted. They were excited, buzzing with the efficiency of a surgical team prepping for a procedure, except the patient on the table was me. And they were not trying to save my life. They packed the car. Coolers of expensive food. Cases of wine. Gifts wrapped in paper I had indirectly paid for. I stood on the front porch and watched them pull out of the driveway. Nadine was adjusting her sunglasses. Jerome was driving. Vanessa was already on her phone, orchestrating whatever came next. They turned onto the boulevard and disappeared behind the row of live oaks. The house went silent. The kind of silence that fills a room after the last visitor leaves a funeral. It should have hurt. A 67-year-old man, abandoned by his family 2 days before Christmas. Standing alone on a porch in a house too big for one person. That is the kind of scene that is supposed to break you. But I was not broken. I was focused. The same focus I felt when a patient coded on my table and every second became a decision between life and death. I walked inside. I locked the door. I walked past the kitchen, past the hallway, lined with photographs of a family that no longer existed, past the portrait of my mother Eleanor, above the console table. I entered my study. This room was my second operating theater. A heavy oak desk in the center, bookshelves filled with volumes on cardiovascular medicine, 3 monitors mounted on the wall. Most men my age used computers to video call their grandchildren. I used mine to monitor my assets, my properties, and the people who thought I was too old to notice what they were doing. I sat down in my leather chair. I looked at the family portrait on the desk. 4 smiling faces from 5 years ago. A lie in a frame. I placed it face down. Then I cracked my knuckles the way I always did before the first incision. After 35 years of cutting open chests and restarting hearts, I knew when something was dying. And this family was flatlining. They thought I was a retired old man backing down. They did not know that I had declared patients dead and brought them back to life. I knew exactly when to cut. And I knew exactly when to wait. And right now, I was waiting. Let me take you back 2 weeks to the night that sealed their fate. That was the real reason I was being exiled from my own holiday. It had nothing to do with tension, or healing, or anxiety. It had everything to do with money. It always does. It was a Tuesday evening in early December. The 4 of us were sitting in the living room after dinner. The gas fireplace was hissing softly. I was in my leather armchair holding a glass of scotch neat. The same chair I had sat in every evening for 20 years. Jerome was on the sofa beside Vanessa. Nadine was in the wingback chair by the window, cradling her wine like a baby bird. The evening had been pleasant enough until Vanessa reached into her designer handbag, a bag that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and pulled out her tablet. She always had a tablet. She always had a presentation. In the 2 years since she married my son, I had been pitched more business ventures than a venture capitalist at a Silicon Valley cocktail party. There had been the organic skincare line, the influencer management agency, the life coaching certification program. All of them required my money. None of them had produced a single dollar of revenue. Tonight's pitch had a new name. She tapped the screen, and a glossy slide appeared. The logo read, Caldwell Community Wellness Center. My last name, in bold. Without my permission. Dad, she said. Her eyes were gleaming with the kind of excitement I had only ever seen in two places. The eyes of a resident watching their first live surgery, and the eyes of a predator spotting wounded prey. We have a massive opportunity. There is a building available on the south side. It is perfect for a community wellness center. Yoga, nutrition counseling, mental health workshops. We can serve underserved communities and generate sustainable revenue at the same time. We just need the seed capital to secure the lease and build out the space. How much? I asked. $100,000. The number hung in the air between us like a blood clot in an artery. I did not blink. $100,000 was significant, but not impossible. However, I am a surgeon. Before I operate, I read every scan. Before I cut, I know exactly what I am cutting into. I do not open a chest based on a good feeling. Show me the prospectus, I said. Show me the previous year's tax filings. Show me the lease agreement. Show me the building inspection report. Show me where the money goes. The room went cold. I could feel the temperature drop the way you feel. Barometric pressure shift before a storm. Jerome stopped breathing for a moment. Vanessa's smile flickered like a fluorescent bulb about to die. We are still finalizing the paperwork, she said. Her voice was smooth, practiced. Our accountant has been slow. But the opportunity is time-sensitive, Dad. The landlord needs a deposit by Friday. If we miss this window, we lose the space to another buyer. Time-sensitive. Every scam in history has been time-sensitive. Every con artist in the world needs the money, right now, today, before you have time to think, before you have time to verify. I had heard this language 1,000 times from pharmaceutical representatives trying to push drugs through my hospital without proper clinical trials. What is the address of this building? I asked. Vanessa rattled off a street number on the south side of Houston. I picked up my phone. I opened the map application. I typed the address. The screen loaded. I zoomed in to the street view. It was not a commercial building suitable for a wellness center. It was a strip mall. And the unit at that address was a nail salon called Glamour Nails and Spa. The sign was pink. There was a neon open sign flickering in the window. There was no available lease. There was no building. There was nothing but a lie with a fresh coat of polish. I turned the phone around so they could all see the screen. I held it steady the way I hold a scalpel. I let the image speak for itself. The silence in the room was surgical. It was the silence of a diagnosis no one wanted to hear. Vanessa's face went through 3 phases in 2 seconds. Surprise. Calculation. And then the tears. They came on command, fast and theatrical, rolling down her cheeks with the precision of an actress hitting her mark. Dad, it is not what it looks like. We have a different unit in mind. That is just the current tenant. They are moving out in January. I swear. I set my phone down. I stood up. I walked to my study. I could feel them watching me, frozen in their seats, calculating their next move. I opened the top drawer of my desk. I pulled out my checkbook. I walked back to the living room. I saw the relief wash over them like warm saline through an IV line. Vanessa wiped her tears. Jerome exhaled. Nadine sat up straighter, already mentally spending the money. They thought I had gone to get the checkbook because I was going to write the $100,000 check. They thought the tears had worked. They thought the presentation had landed. I clicked my pen. I wrote. I tore the check from the book with a clean, precise motion. I handed it to Vanessa. She looked at it. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. It was a check for $500. What is this? She whispered. Her voice was barely audible. That is a donation, I said. When you show me audited financials, a legitimate lease agreement, and a business plan that was not written on the back of a cocktail napkin, we can discuss a capital investment. Until then, $100,000 for a nail salon is not charity. It is fraud. The room detonated. Vanessa burst into tears. Real ones this time. The ugly kind that twist the face and redden the nose. Jerome grabbed his glass of scotch and hurled it into the fireplace. The crystal shattered against the stone, and the alcohol ignited with a blue flash that lit up the room like a surgical lamp. "You are a miser," Nadine screamed. She was on her feet, trembling with fury. "You sit on millions, and you treat us like beggars. You hate your own family. You are a cold, heartless man." Franklin Caldwell. "You always have been." They stormed out. The front door slammed so hard the frame shook. Through the window, I watched Vanessa's SUV peel out of the driveway, tires squealing on the pavement. Jerome was in the passenger seat. He did not look back. I stood in the empty living room. The fire crackled over the broken glass. The smell of burnt scotch hung in the air. I looked at the shattered crystal in the hearth. I did not clean it up. I left it there as evidence. That was the incident. That was why I was difficult. I had refused to fund a lie. I had asked for paperwork. I had committed the unforgivable sin of due diligence. In their eyes, my crime was not cruelty. My crime was clarity. I walked back to my study. I sat down. I opened my laptop, and I began to pull the thread. Because in 35 years of surgery, I had learned one absolute truth. When you find one tumor, you scan for more. They are never alone. They drove away laughing. I could see it through the front window. Nadine was tilting the visor mirror to check her lipstick. Jerome was tapping the steering wheel to a song I could not hear. Vanessa was in the back seat with her phone pressed to her ear, already issuing instructions to someone. They looked like a family heading to vacation. They looked like people who had just gotten away with something. I stood on the porch until the car disappeared behind the live oaks at the end of the boulevard. A neighbor across the road was hanging Christmas lights. He waved. I waved back. He had no idea that the man waving at him had just been evicted from his own holiday by the people he had spent a lifetime protecting. I walked inside. The breakfast dishes were still in the sink. Nadine's coffee cup had a crescent of lipstick on the rim. Jerome's plate held cold scrambled eggs. Vanessa's toast was half-eaten, abandoned when the victory was confirmed. I did not clean up. In the operating room, you never disturb the field until the procedure is complete. I walked to my study and closed the door. The click of the latch was the sound of a sterile environment being sealed. This room was my second operating theater. The oak desk had belonged to a hospital administrator in the 1940s. Bookshelves held 35 years of medical journals annotated in my handwriting. 3 high-resolution monitors were mounted on the wall above a console connected to every digital system I owned. Most retired men built workshops in their garages. I built a command center. Surveillance feeds, financial dashboards, encrypted communications. My colleagues used to joke that I was paranoid. I told them paranoia is just pattern recognition with a bad reputation. I sat down and placed my hands flat on the desk. 3 slow breaths. The same ritual before every surgery. 3 breaths. Then, the first cut. I picked up the phone and dialed the private client services line for my bank. Verification code. Biometric voice scan. The line connected. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell. How may I assist you? I need an immediate freeze on the supplementary credit card issued to Nadine Caldwell. Card ending 7201. Certainly, sir. Is the card lost or stolen? Neither. I have reason to believe the spending is no longer authorized by the primary account holder. Block it. Decline every transaction. Starting now. Done, sir. Anything else? Do the same for Jerome Caldwell. Card ending 4416. Flag any attempted transaction as unauthorized. Send real-time notifications to my phone every time either card is declined. Taken care of, sir." I leaned back. "What is the current combined credit limit across both cards?" The operator typed. $42,000, sir. 42,000. That was the financial lifeline I had just severed. They swiped those cards the way healthy people breathe. Automatically and without gratitude. Thank you. That will be all. I hung up. The first incision was complete. The blood supply to the tumor had been cut. Now it was time to see what was growing inside. I powered on the monitors. The screens cast a blue glow across the room. I typed in passwords no one in my family knew. They were not birthdays or anniversaries. They were serial numbers of surgical instruments from landmark procedures. A language only I could speak. I accessed the security system for the Galveston Beach House. I had installed it 2 years ago, after break-ins along the Gulf Coast. 16 high-definition cameras with infrared night vision and directional microphones capable of capturing a whisper from 30 feet. The system recorded continuously to a cloud server only I could access. Jerome and Vanessa thought the porch cameras were decorative deterrents. They were wrong. The feed loaded. 16 tiles on my center monitor. Kitchen. Living room. Master hallway. Garage. Driveway. Back deck, overlooking the Gulf. I expected an empty house waiting for my family to arrive. I expected the cleaning crew finishing their work. I expected calm. What I saw made my jaw tighten. My pulse did not race. It slowed. It dropped to the rate I maintained during the most dangerous phase of bypass surgery, when the margin between life and death is measured in millimeters. 3 large white vans were parked on my front lawn. Not the driveway. The lawn. The grass I paid $1,500 a month to maintain. Men in work clothes were unloading aluminum staging, folding tables, sound equipment, and lighting rigs. It looked like the setup for a trade show. Not a family Christmas. I switched to the interior cameras. The living room was transformed. My furniture shoved against the walls. My leather reading chair, the one I used every morning to watch the sunrise over the Gulf, had been dragged into the hallway like garbage. And there was the banner. It stretched the entire width of the living room, hung with industrial clips from a metal frame bolted into my ceiling. Caldwell Wellness Summit. Empowering health. Transforming lives. My name. On a banner. In my house. For an event I never authorized, never knew about, and never agreed to host. I zoomed the porch camera. More equipment being unloaded. Cases of product. Boxes. With a brand name I did not recognize. A podium. A microphone stand. A projection screen. This was not a family gathering. This was not a healing retreat. This was a commercial operation staged inside my private property without my knowledge. Then I saw her. Vanessa walked into the living room frame wearing a headset and carrying a clipboard. She was pointing at walls, directing workers, moving through the space with the authority of someone who believed she owned it. But it was what happened next that turned suspicion into certainty. 2 workers approached the fireplace. They reached up and lifted the painting that hung above the mantel. It was not just a painting. It was a watercolor my father had bought in 1961 from a gallery in Fifth Ward, Houston. It was the most valuable object in that house, not in dollars, but in blood. It was the last thing my father ever purchased before his heart gave out 6 months later. A heart I spent my entire career learning to save but was born too late to fix. They leaned it against the sofa like plywood. And in its place, they mounted a second banner. Smaller. It read, Caldwell Wellness Foundation. Changing communities one life at a time. Foundation. Not summit. Foundation. They had incorporated something. They had built an organization. And they had used my name to do it. I reached for my water. My hand was steady. My breathing was controlled. But behind my sternum, in the exact spot where I had repaired thousands of damaged hearts, a cold pressure was building. It was not grief. It was not surprise. It was the diagnostic certainty that the disease was far worse than the presenting symptoms had suggested. I did not look away from the screen. In surgery, You never close the chest until you have found every last lesion. I watched them for the next hour. I did not move from my chair. I did not eat. I did not check my phone. I sat in my study in Houston and watched my life being dismantled 200 miles away through 16 camera feeds with the clinical detachment of a surgeon reviewing a time-lapse of a tumor consuming an organ. The living room was only the beginning. I switched to the camera in the hallway outside the master bedroom. 2 workers were carrying boxes out of the study I kept at the beach house. It was a smaller version of my Houston command center. A reading desk. A shelf of medical references I kept for vacation mornings when I liked to review case histories with my coffee. A framed photograph of my surgical team from 1998, the year we performed the first minimally invasive mitral valve repair in the state of Texas. The workers dumped the boxes in the garage. They did not stack them carefully. They tossed them the way you toss garbage bags into a dumpster. I watched a box land sideways and spill open. I could see the spines of my books scattered across the concrete floor. 35 years of knowledge, treated like recycling. I switched cameras again. The guest bedroom had been converted into what appeared to be a staging area. Folding tables were lined with rows of identical white boxes. I zoomed in. Each box bore a label. The label had a logo I had never seen before. A stylized leaf wrapped around a caduceus, the medical symbol. Beneath the logo were 3 words that made my blood slow to a crawl. Dr. Caldwell's Wellness Protocol. I read it again. Dr. Caldwell. My name. My title. My 35 years of medical credibility reduced to a marketing label on a box I had never seen, never approved, and never been consulted about. They had not just stolen my name, they had stolen my profession. They had taken the 2 words I had spent a lifetime earning, Dr. Caldwell, and stamped them onto a product like a brand on cattle. I zoomed in further. The box listed ingredients: ashwagandha, turmeric extract, collagen peptides, and a compound I did not immediately recognize. I copied the name from the screen and typed it into a medical database I still had access to through my hospital alumni credentials. The results loaded. I read them twice. Then I read them a 3rd time, because the first 2 readings seemed impossible. The compound was phenibut. It was a synthetic neurotropic drug developed in the Soviet Union in the 1960s. It was used primarily as an anti-anxiety agent in Russian clinical settings, but had never been approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration for any medical purpose. It was classified as a dietary supplement loophole, legal to sell but not legal to market with medical claims. At low doses, it produced mild relaxation. At the doses listed on this label, it could cause respiratory depression, seizures, and in rare cases, organ failure. They were not selling vitamins. They were selling a controlled substance disguised as a wellness product, and they were selling it under my name, under the name of a board-certified cardiothoracic surgeon. If a single person had an adverse reaction, the lawsuits would not land on Vanessa. They would land on me, Dr. Caldwell, the man whose signature was on the label. Except I had never signed anything. I switched back to the living room camera. Vanessa was now standing at the podium running a sound check. She tapped the microphone twice. The speakers crackled to life. She smiled. It was the smile of a woman rehearsing for a performance she had been planning for months. Behind her, Nadine walked into the frame. She was holding a glass of wine at 2 in the afternoon. She looked around the room with a proprietary gaze that made my skin tighten. She was not horrified by the transformation of our home. She was admiring it. She pointed at my favorite reading chair, which a worker had brought back into the hallway, and made a shooing motion with her free hand. The worker grabbed it and dragged it toward the garage. They were erasing me. There was no other way to describe it. They were systematically removing every trace of Franklin Caldwell from the property so they could fill the space with a fiction. The fiction that this was Vanessa's empire. The fiction that this foundation was legitimate. The fiction that Dr. Caldwell endorsed their poison. I watched Nadine laugh at something one of the workers said. She sipped her wine. She touched the diamond pendant at her throat, the one I had given her when Jerome was born. She looked happy. She looked powerful. She had no idea that the man who had given her that diamond was watching her betray him in real time and cataloging every second of it. I minimized the camera feeds and opened a new folder on my desktop. I labeled it Galveston Evidence. I began saving screenshots. The banner, the product boxes, the label with my name, the workers removing my belongings, Nadine directing the erasure, Vanessa at the podium. Each image was time-stamped and geotagged by the security system. Each one was admissible. I was building a case the way I built a surgical plan, layer by layer, incision by incision. You do not rush a complex procedure. You document every anomaly. You photograph every lesion, and you do not close until you are certain you have found the primary source of the disease. But I had not found it yet. The banner was a symptom. The product was a symptom. The erasure of my presence was a symptom. The disease itself was deeper. I could feel it the way a surgeon feels resistance in tissue that should be soft. Something was hiding beneath the surface. I looked at the clock on my desk. It was just past 1 in the afternoon. The family had been at the beach house for less than 2 hours, and they had already converted my sanctuary into a crime scene. But I knew from experience that criminals who move this fast have been planning for a long time. This operation did not start today. It started months ago. And the real blueprint was not hanging on my wall. It was hidden in the financial records I had not yet seen. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to Sarah Nguyen's number, but I did not call her yet. I needed more data before I briefed my attorney. I needed to hear what Vanessa was saying when she thought no one was listening. I turned back to the monitors. I selected the living room feed. I moved my cursor to the audio icon. I had not activated the microphones yet. I had been watching in silence, reading the body language, interpreting the visual evidence. But now, I needed to hear the words. I clicked the icon. The microphone went live. And what I heard, in the next 60 seconds, changed everything. The microphone captured everything. The audio was surgical. It was as if I were standing in the room beside them, close enough to smell the perfume Vanessa wore and the wine on Nadine's breath. The directional pickup isolated their voices from the background noise with a clarity that would have impressed any court stenographer. Jerome was pacing near the fireplace. I could hear his footsteps on the hardwood, a nervous rhythm like an irregular heartbeat. Vanessa had removed her headset and was standing with her arms crossed. The rehearsal was over. Now they were arguing. Vanessa, we cannot charge people at the door. Jerome's voice was tight. It is illegal. We do not have a permit for a commercial event at a private residence. If the neighbors call the police, we are finished. Vanessa laughed. It was not a warm sound. It was the laugh of someone who had calculated every variable and found the objection irrelevant. Jerome, stop being a coward. It is a private event. We are asking for voluntary donations. It is a gray area. Besides, who is going to report us? Your father is sitting in Houston eating leftovers. He has no idea what is happening. I took a sip of water. I was 200 miles away. I could hear her breathing. Jerome rubbed his face. But what if we do not raise enough? We are already underwater. We owe $14,000 on the credit cards, $22,000 on the car leases. The condo mortgage is 3 months behind. If this does not work, we are bankrupt by February. The numbers organize themselves in my brain automatically. My son was drowning in debt he had never mentioned. He had been living a lifestyle funded entirely by fiction. Vanessa stepped closer. Her voice dropped, but the microphone caught every syllable. That is exactly why tonight matters. I have 60 confirmed guests. Half are from your father's old hospital network. They trust the Caldwell name. They will buy the wellness packages because they believe Dr. Franklin Caldwell endorses the product. Each package is $5,000. If we sell 30, That is 150,000 in one night. We pay the debts. We fund the next phase. And we never worry about money again. Jerome looked at the banner above the fireplace. But using Dad's name, using the house. What happens when he finds out? He will not find out. She grabbed his shoulders and looked into his eyes. Jerome, your father is losing it. He forgot to sign the check 2 weeks ago. He is getting confused. He is slipping. We just need to push that narrative a little further. I was not confused 2 weeks ago. I had refused to sign because the address was a nail salon. But she was rewriting history, turning my clarity into evidence of decline, Vanessa continued. Her voice dropped to a whisper that the microphone picked up with perfect fidelity. After tonight, we take the proceeds and hire the attorney my mother recommended. We file for competency hearings. We tell the judge your father cannot manage his own affairs. We show them how he hoards money while his family suffers. We present Dr. Evans's evaluation. We get power of attorney. Jerome. Full legal control. Dr. Evans. I filed that name. I did not recognize it yet. But I would. And once we have power of attorney? Jerome asked. We sell this house. Vanessa's eyes were bright. The market is hot on the Gulf. This property is worth $2.5 million minimum. We sell it. Put the money through the foundation. Pay ourselves salaries. And your father goes into a facility where professionals can manage his moods and his medications. A facility. She said it the way you say storage unit. A place to put something you no longer need but cannot legally discard. Jerome looked at the floor. What kind of facility? Vanessa released his shoulders. She straightened her dress. She smiled. It was the coldest smile I had ever seen on a human face. And I had spent 35 years delivering life and death verdicts. I do not care if he eats dog food, Jerome. It is a win-win. We get the money. He gets care. And we never have to sit through another one of his lectures about financial responsibility. I stopped breathing. Not from shock. I was performing the same internal assessment I conducted before every high-risk surgery. Heart rate, respiratory rate, cognitive function, emotional contamination. I was checking myself for bias. I was making sure what I heard was real. It was real. My daughter-in-law had just outlined a plan to declare me incompetent, seize my assets, sell my home, and warehouse me in the cheapest facility available. And she did not care if I ate dog food. I waited for Jerome to object. I waited for the boy I had taught to suture a banana when he was 12 because he wanted to be a doctor like me. I waited for him to say, "That is my father." I waited for him to say no. He looked at Vanessa. He looked at the banner. He looked at the boxes with my name on them. And he nodded. "Okay," he said. "But we have to be smart. We cannot let him get suspicious." "We will not," Vanessa said. She kissed him on the cheek. "You are a good husband. We are doing this for our future, a future built on my grave, funded by my reputation, secured by my imprisonment." My son had just agreed to bury me alive. I turned off the audio. My hand was steady as I reached for the water, but there was a tremor deep inside my chest. It was not fear. It was the vibration a surgeon feels when the saw hits bone, the resistance of something that should not be there. I picked up my phone. Sarah Wynne answered on the second ring. "Franklin," she said. "It is the day before Christmas Eve. What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong, Sarah. But I need you to open a file. I need a full forensic audit of the Caldwell Wellness Foundation. Background checks on every connected entity. And Sarah, I need you to research the legal requirements for filing a competency challenge in Texas. Not because I am filing one, because someone is filing one against me." Silence on the line. Then the rapid clatter of a keyboard. "I am opening a new file right now," she said. "Do not confront them. Let them dig the hole. We will push them in later. I am not going to confront them, Sarah. I am going to operate. And by the time I am finished, they will wish I had simply been difficult. I hung up. On the monitor, Vanessa was laughing at something a worker said. She looked like the queen of a kingdom she had stolen. Enjoy it while it lasts. I whispered. Because your next residence will not have a Gulf view. Sarah sent the preliminary file on the Caldwell Wellness Foundation at 9 that evening. The email arrived with a chime that sounded like a flatline alarm in the silence of my study. I did not open it immediately. I adjusted my reading glasses. I straightened the notepad on my desk. In 35 years of surgery, I learned that you never open a body unless you are prepared to deal with what you find inside. I clicked the attachment. The file was a PDF thick, with tables, pie charts, and stock photographs of smiling children. It was designed to look impressive to people who donate with their hearts rather than their heads. But I did not look at the graphics. I looked at the numbers. Numbers do not smile. Numbers do not lie. Numbers are the vital signs of an organization, and these vital signs told me the patient was dead on arrival. I scrolled past the mission statement. It was a paragraph of buzzwords about empowering underserved communities through holistic wellness and preventative health education. It read like a pharmaceutical brochure, written by someone who had never taken a biology class. I went straight to the cash flow statement. The foundation had been operating for 14 months. In that time, it had received $250,000 in donations. $250,000. I paused. I had not expected that number. I did not think Vanessa and Jerome possessed the discipline to raise that kind of capital. But then, I looked at the donor list, and the mystery dissolved. The names were familiar. They were people I knew. Colleagues from the hospital. Members of my golf club. Families, whose hearts I had literally held in my hands during surgery. They had donated because they saw my name attached to the foundation. They trusted me. They trusted Dr. Caldwell. And Vanessa had mined that trust like a vein of gold. I moved to the expense column. This is where the truth always hides. A legitimate charity operates with overhead costs between 10 and 15%. The Caldwell Wellness Foundation had an overhead ratio of 88%. 88 cents of every donated dollar vanished before it touched a charitable cause. I ran the numbers twice. The diagnosis was terminal. I drilled into the line items. There were massive monthly payments categorized as consulting fees. $8,500 per month to a company called VNC Health Solutions. I opened a new browser tab and searched the Delaware State Business Registry. VNC Health Solutions was a limited liability company registered to a post office box in Wilmington. The registered agent was Vanessa Noel Caldwell. She was paying herself $8,500 a month to consult for her own charity. In 14 months, that was $119,000 funneled directly into her pocket through a shell company she had created for the sole purpose of laundering donated money. I kept scrolling. Travel expenses totaled $38,000. The destinations included Cancun, Scottsdale, and Key West. Each trip was categorized as donor outreach and community engagement. I remembered seeing photographs on Vanessa's social media from a resort in Cancun. She was holding a cocktail by the infinity pool. That cocktail was paid for by the widow of a cardiologist I had mentored for 15 years who had donated $10,000 last spring. There were car lease payments categorized as transportation logistics. There were designer clothing purchases categorized as branding and public relations materials. There were restaurant bills in the hundreds categorized as stakeholder engagement dinners. Every personal expense in their lives had been routed through the foundation and relabeled as a business cost. The total amount embezzled in 14 months was $180,000. They had drained the organization the way a parasite drains its host, slowly enough to avoid detection, aggressively enough to keep themselves fed. I felt a cold rage settle behind my sternum. It was not the hot rage of a father betrayed. It was the absolute zero fury of a physician watching someone poison a patient. These donors were my patients in a sense. They had trusted the Caldwell name. They had given their money in good faith. And it had been stolen by a woman who used that money to lease a Range Rover and drink cocktails in Mexico. But the financial theft was not the worst discovery. The worst was waiting at the bottom of the document in a section labeled Board of Directors and Governance. I scrolled down. I expected to see Vanessa listed as president. She was. I expected to see Jerome listed as executive director. He was. But the third name stopped my breathing, the way a cardiac arrest stops a heartbeat. Honorary Medical Advisor, Dr. Franklin Caldwell, MD. Facts. My name. My credentials. My board certifications. Listed on the governance page of a fraudulent organization I had never joined, never endorsed, and never known existed. And beneath my name was a signature. My signature. I leaned closer to the screen. I magnified the image to 400%. I knew my signature. The way I knew the anatomy of the human heart. It had a specific loop in the F and an aggressive cross on the T. It was a signature I had developed over decades of signing surgical consent forms, prescription pads, and million-dollar research grants. The signature on the screen was identical, but it was too identical. The ink was uniform. It lacked the subtle pressure variations of a pen moving across paper. It was a digital reproduction. They had taken my signature from an old document, perhaps a prescription, perhaps a birthday card, scanned it, and pasted it onto the bylaws of their criminal organization. This was forgery. This was identity theft. This was a federal crime. And by listing me as the honorary medical advisor, they had made me legally liable for every cent they stole and every pill they sold. If the authorities investigated, they would come for me first. The board-certified surgeon, the man with the reputation, the perfect shield. I sat back in my chair. The leather creaked in the silence. I looked at the family portrait I had placed face down hours ago. I did not turn it over. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. There was no conversation that could fix a forged signature. There was no family meeting that could resolve a federal crime. They had not just betrayed me. They had weaponized me. They had turned my life's work into a camouflage for their greed. I closed the PDF. I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it Surgical Evidence. I saved every document. I backed it up to an encrypted cloud server. I printed hard copies and locked them in the biometric, safe under my desk. The autopsy was complete. The cause of death was clear. My family had been killed by metastatic greed, and the cancer had originated in a woman who smiled while she forged my name. The only question remaining was how deep the disease had spread. And I already suspected it went deeper than money, deeper than fraud, deeper than I wanted to believe. I looked at the clock. It was approaching midnight. I had been in my study for 12 hours. But I was not tired. I was the opposite of tired. I was the surgeon at hour 14 of a complex procedure who has just discovered an unexpected mass behind the primary tumor. You do not stop. You do not rest. You keep cutting until you find the margin, because if you leave even a single cell behind, it grows back. But the financial fraud was not the worst of it. The forged signature was not the deepest cut. The embezzlement was not the most dangerous diagnosis. What I discovered next made the theft of $180,000 feel like a parking ticket. It started with the phenibut. I had identified the compound on the product label hours earlier, but I had been consumed by the financial autopsy and had not yet completed the pharmacological analysis. Now, approaching midnight, with the house silent around me and the camera feeds showing my family asleep at the beach house, I returned to the chemistry. I pulled up the medical database through my hospital alumni credentials. I typed phenibut into the search field and began reading with the same concentration I applied to preoperative cardiac imaging. The compound was a synthetic neurotropic agent developed in the Soviet Union in the 1960s. It acted on the gamma-aminobutyric acid receptors in the brain, producing sedation, euphoria, and anxiolytic effects at moderate doses. It had legitimate clinical applications in Russia, but it had never been approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration for any therapeutic purpose. At the dosage listed on the product label, 300 milligrams per capsule, with a recommended serving of 3 capsules daily, the consumer would be ingesting 900 milligrams of an unregulated psychoactive substance. The clinical literature was unambiguous. At sustained doses above 600 milligrams, phenibut caused physical dependence within 2 weeks. Withdrawal symptoms included severe anxiety, psychosis, and seizures. At doses above 1,000 milligrams, particularly in elderly patients or those with cardiovascular conditions, respiratory depression and organ failure were documented. They were not selling wellness. They were selling addiction in a white box with my name on it. And if a single customer with a heart condition took the recommended dose and collapsed, the wrongful death lawsuit would name Dr. Franklin Caldwell as the endorsing physician, my medical license, my malpractice insurance, my reputation built over 3,000 surgeries. All of it would be incinerated because my forged signature was on the label of a product that could kill people. The public health dimension transformed this from a family betrayal into a civic emergency. But I was not finished. The phenibut was the tumor they were selling to others. There was a second tumor, one they had planted inside me. I pushed back from the desk and walked to the kitchen. The house was dark. The only light came from the security panel by the front door, green LEDs blinking in the silence. I opened the cabinet above the coffee maker, the cabinet where I kept my daily medications organized in a 7-day pill case. I had been taking the same cardiac regimen for 8 years following a mild arrhythmia detected during a routine physical. Metoprolol, 50 milligrams, once daily in the morning. It was a beta blocker that regulated my heart rate and blood pressure. Without it, my heart would work harder than it should. Over time, the strain could trigger atrial fibrillation, heart failure, or sudden cardiac arrest. I opened the pill case. I removed one of the white tablets from the Tuesday compartment. I held it under the kitchen light and examined it the way I examined tissue samples, with naked eye precision before reaching for magnification. The tablet was wrong. It was subtle. A civilian would not have noticed. But I had prescribed metoprolol to hundreds of patients over 3 decades. I knew the size, the color, the weight, the surface texture, the way it sat between the fingertips. The tablet in my hand was smaller. The white was slightly different, a shade too bright. The scoring line down the center was thinner than the standard 50 milligram formulation. I walked to my study. I opened the drawer where I kept a digital milligram scale, a tool I used for weighing supplement powders during my nutritional research. I placed the tablet on the scale. A standard 50 milligram metoprolol tablet weighs approximately 190 milligrams, including the binder. The tablet on my scale weighed 47 milligrams. 47 milligrams. That was the weight of a 12.5 milligram metoprolol tablet. Someone had replaced my 50 milligram heart medication with a dose 1/4 of the prescribed strength. I had been taking a fraction of the medication I needed for my heart to function safely. I opened every compartment of the pill case, Monday through Sunday. Every single tablet was the wrong size. Every single one was the 12.5 milligram formulation. This was not a pharmacy error. Pharmacies do not fill an entire week's supply with the wrong dosage and place them in a home pill case. This was deliberate. Someone had opened my case, removed the correct tablets, and replaced them with pills that looked similar enough to pass a casual glance, but were pharmacologically insufficient to protect my heart. I stood in my kitchen at midnight and performed a rapid differential diagnosis on my own body. For the past 3 months, I had been experiencing intermittent dizziness, episodes of unusual fatigue, moments of confusion that I had attributed to aging and retirement. I had told myself it was normal. I had told myself that 67-year-old men get tired. But I was a cardiac surgeon. I knew that dizziness and fatigue in a patient with a known arrhythmia who is suddenly receiving 1/4 of their prescribed beta blocker is not aging. It is iatrogenic cardiac destabilization. Someone was weakening my heart on purpose. There was only one person in this house who had access to my pill case every morning. One person who woke before me and prepared the coffee. One person who stood at this counter while I was still in bed and had 60 unobserved seconds with my medication. Vanessa. She stayed at our house every Wednesday and Thursday when Jerome had evening shifts at his part-time job. She made breakfast. She poured my coffee. She smiled at me across the table and asked about my health with the tender concern of a devoted daughter-in-law. And while she smiled, she was replacing my heart medication with pills that would slowly, silently, irreversibly weaken the organ I had spent my career saving in others. She was not just planning to declare me incompetent. She was engineering the incompetence. She was creating the symptoms that would support the diagnosis. The confusion, the fatigue, the cognitive fog. Dr. Evans, whoever he was, would examine me and find exactly what Vanessa had manufactured, a man whose mind was deteriorating. Because a man whose heart is failing does not think clearly. A man receiving 1/4 of his cardiac medication does not function at full capacity. She was killing me. Not with a gun, not with a knife, but with a pill case and a smile. 1 milligram at a time. I placed the tablet back on the scale. I photographed it beside a ruler for documentation. I bagged a sample in a sterile envelope from my desk. And then I stood still in the dark kitchen and felt my own pulse in my wrist. It was fast. Faster than it should have been. Because for 3 months, my heart had been running without its safety net. I sat in my study with the pill bottle in one hand and the scale reading photograph on my screen. My resting heart rate was 114 beats per minute. For a 67-year-old cardiac patient who had been unknowingly deprived of his beta blocker for 3 months, that number was not just alarming. It was a countdown. I had spent 41 years cutting into the human body. I had held beating hearts in my palms, rerouted blood vessels thinner than fishing line, and sewn tissue back together while families prayed in waiting rooms down the hall. I had seen every kind of disease. I had named every kind of failure. But I had never diagnosed anything quite like this. My own daughter-in-law was poisoning me. My own wife was helping her cover it up. And my own son did not have the spine to stop either of them. The evidence was clean and precise. The Phenibut products. The swapped metoprolol tablets. The fabricated foundation. The forged signature. The offshore consulting fees. The plan to declare me incompetent and sell my property. Every piece fit together like the organs inside a chest cavity. And like any surgery, the sequence of what I did next mattered more than the tools I used. I needed one phone call, not to a lawyer, not to a journalist, not to a family member who might beg me to reconsider. I needed Dr. James Whitfield. James and I had not spoken in almost 4 years. The last time was at a medical conference in San Antonio, where we shared a bottle of bourbon and talked about retirement. Before that, we had shared something far more significant. In 2009, James was a rising star at the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation when he collapsed during a morning briefing. Aortic dissection. Type A. The kind that kills 90% of patients before they reach the operating table. He was airlifted to Houston Methodist. And by pure chance or divine intervention, I was the only cardiothoracic surgeon available that morning. The operation lasted 11 hours. I replaced his ascending aorta with a Dacron graft, repaired the aortic valve, and rerouted 2 coronary arteries that had been sheared by the tear. When James woke up 3 days later, the first thing he said to me was, "Franklin, I owe you a life." I told him he owed me nothing. That was the truth then. But tonight, I needed to collect. James Whitfield was now the Deputy Commissioner of the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. His division handled cases involving unapproved drugs, fraudulent health products, and threats to public safety. The Phenibut capsules sitting in my evidence folder were not just a dietary supplement. At 900 milligrams per day, sold under a licensed physician's name without his consent, distributed through a fraudulent nonprofit, they constituted a federal crime under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. James did not just have the authority to investigate. He had the authority to mobilize the FBI. I picked up my phone at exactly 9:47 in the evening on December 23rd. I dialed his personal number from memory. It rang 4 times. Franklin. His voice was cautious but warm. It has been a long time. It has, I said. James, I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen. As a federal officer, not as a friend. The warmth disappeared. His tone shifted to the clinical precision I recognized from years of operating rooms and conference panels. Go ahead. I spoke for exactly 14 minutes. I did not ramble. I did not editorialize. I presented the case, the way I would present a surgical plan to a team of residents. First, the foundation. I gave him the name, the registration number, the financials, the 88% overhead. Then the product. Phenibut, 300 milligrams per capsule, 3 capsules per day, sold as a wellness supplement under the Caldwell name. Then the forged signature placing me as honorary medical advisor. Then the metoprolol substitution. Then the plan to declare me incompetent and seize my assets. When I finished, the line was silent for almost 10 seconds. Franklin, he said slowly, you are describing at minimum 5 federal violations: fraud, forgery, distribution of an unapproved drug, conspiracy. And what you are telling me about the medication swap sounds like attempted murder. I know what it sounds like, I said. That is why I am calling you. He asked me if I had documentation. I told him I had 417 files organized in a folder on an encrypted drive. Photographs, financial records, security camera footage, audio recordings, product samples, and a pharmacological analysis comparing the weight of authentic metoprolol tablets against the ones found in my pill case. James exhaled slowly. I could hear him writing something down. Here is what I need you to do, he said. Do not confront anyone. Do not change your routine. Do not give any indication that you know anything. I am going to contact the Houston field office tonight. I will also loop in the IRS Criminal Investigation Division because the financial structure you described has tax fraud written across every line. If the offshore consulting payments are real, we may also bring in Treasury. Franklin, this is not a small case. I understand, I said. One more thing. His voice dropped lower. The medication tampering. I want you to see a cardiologist tomorrow morning. Not your regular one. Someone independent. Get a full workup. ECG. Echocardiogram. Blood panel. If your heart has been unprotected for 3 months, you could be walking around with damage you cannot feel yet. Promise me. I will, I said. Good. And Franklin. He paused. I never forgot what you did for me in that operating room. I meant what I said. I owed you a life. Consider this the beginning of repayment. The call ended at 10:01. 14 minutes. That was all it took to set the machinery in motion. No shouting, no threats, no dramatic confrontation. Just one surgeon calling another, presenting the diagnosis, and requesting the operation. I leaned back in my chair and placed both hands flat on the desk. My heart was still racing, but not from the missing medication. It was racing because, for the first time in 3 weeks, I was not playing defense. The scalpel was in my hand now. Downstairs in Galveston, they were decorating my beach house with flowers and banners for a wellness summit that would never happen. They were rehearsing speeches for donors who would never write another check. They were counting money they would never spend. And in exactly 36 hours, federal agents would be standing at my front door. I opened my laptop and typed one final note in the surgical evidence folder. Case transferred to federal authority. Timestamp 2101, December 23. The operation is no longer mine, but the outcome will be. I closed the laptop, turned off the desk lamp, and sat in the darkness. Somewhere in Washington, James Whitfield was already making calls. Somewhere in Houston, an FBI field agent was reading my name for the first time. And somewhere in Galveston, Vanessa was laughing, pouring wine, and telling my son that everything was going to be fine. She had no idea that the one phone call she never heard had already ended everything. I woke on December 24th at 5:30 in the morning. Christmas Eve. The house was silent. The street was silent. Even the birds outside my window seemed to understand that something was wrong and had chosen not to sing. I showered, dressed in a pressed white shirt and gray slacks, and made my own coffee for the first time in months. I stood at the kitchen counter and watched the dark liquid fill the cup, and I thought about all the mornings Vanessa had handed me that same cup with a smile. How many of those mornings had she already switched my pills? How many times had she watched me swallow the wrong dosage and then kissed my cheek and told me to have a good day? The intimacy of betrayal is what makes it surgical. It requires closeness, trust, repetition. A stranger cannot poison you. Only someone you love can get that close. I left the house at 6:15 and drove across Houston in the gray pre-dawn light. James had been specific. Do not use your regular cardiologist. Do not go anywhere connected to your family. So I called Dr. Rachel Guerrero, a colleague from my years at Baylor College of Medicine. Rachel was a clinical cardiologist, with no connection to Nadine, Jerome, Vanessa, or anyone in my social circle. She had retired from full-time practice 2 years ago, but still maintained privileges at a private diagnostic center in the Galleria area. When I called her at 5:45, she answered on the second ring. "Franklin," she said. "It is Christmas Eve." "I know," I said. "And I would not be calling if it were not serious." She heard the weight in my voice. She did not ask another question. She told me to meet her at the center, at 7. The facility was empty when I arrived. Rachel was waiting in the lobby, wearing a navy cardigan and reading glasses, holding a paper cup of tea. She looked at me the way physicians look at other physicians when they suspect the news is bad. Not with pity, with professional gravity. I told her everything. Not the fraud, not the foundation, not the FBI. Only the medical facts. I told her I had reason to believe my metoprolol had been replaced with a lower dosage formulation for approximately 3 months. I showed her the photograph of the pill on the digital scale. I showed her the weight comparison. Authentic 50 mg metoprolol tartrate tablets weigh approximately 190 milligrams. The tablets in my pill case weighed 47 milligrams, consistent with a 12.5 milligram formulation. Rachel set down her tea and stared at me for a long time. "Franklin," she said quietly, "you are telling me someone deliberately reduced your cardiac medication by 75%. "That is exactly what I am telling you," I said. She did not ask who. She did not ask why. She was a cardiologist, not a detective. She simply said, "Let us find out what it did to you." Over the next 2 hours, Rachel put me through every test in her arsenal. A 12-lead electrocardiogram, a transthoracic echocardiogram, a complete blood panel including troponin, B-type natriuretic peptide, and a comprehensive metabolic panel, a 24-hour Holter monitor that she strapped to my chest and told me to wear until Christmas morning. The ECG results came first. She printed the strip and held it under the fluorescent light, tracing the waveforms with her fingertip. "Your QTC interval is prolonged," she said. 482 milliseconds. Normal is under 450. You are in a danger zone for ventricular arrhythmia. I knew what that meant. I had seen it on hundreds of monitors during my career. A prolonged QT interval means the heart's electrical system is taking too long to recharge between beats. Under stress or physical exertion, That delay can trigger a fatal rhythm called torsades de pointe. The heart does not stop. It spirals. It fibrillates. And without immediate intervention, the patient dies. The echocardiogram showed mild left ventricular dilation. Not catastrophic, but measurable. 3 months without adequate beta blockade had allowed my blood pressure to run unchecked, and the heart muscle had begun to stretch to compensate. Rachel pointed to the measurement on the screen. "Your ejection fraction is 48%, she said. "It should be 55 or above. You have early-stage systolic dysfunction." She sat across from me and removed her glasses. "Franklin," she said, "if this had continued for another 3 to 6 months, you would have developed full congestive heart failure. And with the prolonged QT, any sudden stress event, a fall, an argument, even a nightmare, could have triggered a lethal arrhythmia. Whoever did this to you was not just negligent. They were building a time bomb inside your chest." I sat very still. I had known this intellectually when I weighed the pills, but hearing another physician say it aloud, seeing the numbers on the screen, feeling the Holter monitor pressing against my ribs, the reality became something different, something heavier. My daughter-in-law had not just stolen my money and forged my name. She had engineered a slow, invisible death. And my wife had either helped or looked the other way. Rachel prescribed a corrected metoprolol regimen. 50 milligrams twice daily for the first week to safely restore therapeutic levels, then reassess. She also prescribed a low-dose ACE inhibitor to address the early ventricular remodeling. She told me to avoid caffeine, alcohol, and any physical or emotional stress. I almost laughed at the last instruction. Avoid emotional stress. On Christmas Eve. While the FBI was preparing to raid my beach house and my family was rehearsing speeches for a fraudulent wellness summit, Rachel handed me a sealed envelope containing her full diagnostic report. Every measurement, every waveform, every conclusion. I asked her to include a formal medical opinion on causation. She wrote it by hand on the last page. "It is my professional opinion that the deliberate substitution of metoprolol 50 milligrams with a 12.5 milligram formulation over a period of approximately 90 days directly caused the cardiac abnormalities documented in this report. This substitution, if continued, posed a significant and foreseeable risk of death." I thanked her. She held my hand at the door and said, "Franklin, whoever did this to you, make sure they never do it to anyone else." I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. The Holter monitor beeped softly against my chest, counting every beat, recording every irregularity, building a medical record that no defense attorney on earth could dispute. It was 10:15 on Christmas Eve morning. In Galveston, they were probably arranging flowers and testing microphones. In Washington, James Whitfield was coordinating with federal agents. And in my chest, a damaged heart was beating with a steadiness that surprised even me. The diagnosis was complete. The evidence was sealed. The patient was still alive. Now it was time to prepare for Christmas. I returned home at 10:45 on Christmas Eve morning and locked the front door behind me. The house smelled like fresh coffee and old wood. I stood in the hallway for a moment and listened. Nothing. No footsteps upstairs. No television. No voice calling my name from the kitchen asking if I wanted breakfast. For the first time in 34 years of marriage, the silence in this house was not lonely. It was strategic. I carried Rachel's sealed diagnostic envelope upstairs and placed it on my desk beside the encrypted hard drive, the printed financial records, and the folder of security camera screenshots. I looked at the spread of evidence, the way I used to look at a patient's chart before a complex operation. Every document was an organ. Every timestamp was a vital sign. And together, they told the story of a body that was dying from the inside. But a surgeon does not operate alone. He needs an anesthesiologist to keep the patient still. He needs a scrub nurse to hand him the right instrument at the right second. He needs a perfusionist to keep the blood flowing while he stops the heart. I had gathered the evidence. I had made the phone call. I had confirmed the diagnosis. Now, I needed to assemble my surgical team. I opened my laptop and began composing the most important emails of my life. The first went to Sarah Nguyen. Sarah had already begun the forensic audit of the Caldwell Wellness Foundation. But now, I needed her to expand the scope. I attached Rachel's medical report and typed a precise summary. The medication substitution constitutes attempted murder under Texas Penal Code. Section 1902. I need you to prepare 3 documents by December 26th. First, a petition for an emergency protective order against Vanessa Caldwell and Nadine Caldwell. Second, a civil complaint for fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Third, a divorce petition with fault grounds citing fraud and endangerment. I also need you to contact a criminal defense attorney who can advise on my exposure as the forged medical advisor of the foundation. I did not ask her if she could do it by the 26th. Sarah had once prepared a 72-page litigation brief in 19 hours during a patent dispute. Christmas would not slow her down. The second email went to Marcus Delgado. Marcus was not a journalist. He was a forensic accountant I had met through a malpractice case 7 years ago. He had testified as an expert witness, tracing hidden payments through 4 layers of shell companies in under a week. The jury had been hypnotized. I needed that same precision now. I sent him the foundation's financial records, the VNC Health Solutions consulting invoices, and the Delaware LLC registration. I asked him to produce a complete money trail showing every dollar from donation to personal expenditure. I told him the FBI and IRS were already involved and that his report would likely become a federal exhibit. The third email went to someone I had never contacted before. Dr. Christine Albrecht, a toxicologist at the University of Texas Health Science Center. I needed an independent laboratory analysis of the phenibut capsules. Not just confirmation of the active ingredient, but a full breakdown of concentration, purity, contaminants, and a written opinion on whether the product met any FDA standard for human consumption. I packaged 2 capsules in a sealed evidence bag, labeled them with the date and source, and prepared them for courier delivery on December 26th. The fourth and final email went to James Whitfield. I attached Rachel's diagnostic report and typed a single paragraph. James, the attached medical report confirms cardiac damage consistent with deliberate medication tampering over approximately 90 days. The cardiologist's written opinion attributes the damage directly to the substitution and states that continuation posed a significant and foreseeable risk of death. This document supports the attempted murder element we discussed. I have also retained a forensic accountant to produce a complete financial trail for the foundation. His report will be available within 72 hours. Please advise if your team needs anything further before proceeding. I sent all 4 emails within 11 minutes. Then I sat back and looked at my screen. 4 messages, 4 professionals, 4 scalpels, now moving simultaneously through different layers of the same disease. Sarah would handle the legal architecture. Marcus would map the money. Christine would confirm the poison. And James would bring the federal weight. Each one operated independently, but their work would converge on the same target at the same time. Like 4 surgical teams working on the same patient from different angles. I opened a new document and titled it Operation Timeline. I created a simple grid. Down the left column, I listed every hour from now until midnight on December 25th. Across the top, I listed 4 categories: legal, financial, forensic, federal. Then I began filling in the cells. Sarah's protective order filing, December 26th morning. Marcus's preliminary money trail, December 26th evening. Christine's lab results, December 27th. James's FBI team deployment, December 25th. Exact time to be confirmed. The grid looked like a surgical schedule. Every procedure had a start time, an expected duration, and a critical milestone. And like any surgical schedule, there was no room for delay. If one element fell behind, the entire operation would be compromised. I printed the timeline and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Then I opened the security camera feed on my second monitor. In Galveston, the beach house was alive with activity. Workers were arranging chairs in the living room. A florist was placing white arrangements on every surface. Vanessa was standing on the back deck talking on her phone, gesturing with her free hand, laughing at something the person on the other end had said. I watched her laugh and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even the cold satisfaction of a man who knows his enemy is unaware. I felt the calm that comes after a diagnosis is confirmed and the surgical plan is set. The disease has been identified. The team has been assembled. The instruments are sterilized. Tomorrow was Christmas. Tomorrow, the first incision would be made. I closed the laptop and walked downstairs to make dinner. Just a simple plate of grilled salmon and steamed vegetables. A surgeon's meal before a long operation. I ate alone at the kitchen table, chewed slowly, and listened to the silence of a house that was about to become a command center. At exactly 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A text from James Whitfield. 2 words. We are ready. I set the phone down, washed my plate, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet. Then I turned off the kitchen light and climbed the stairs to bed. Tomorrow was Christmas. And for the first time in my life, I was looking forward to it. I opened my eyes at 4:51 on Christmas morning. The Holter monitor was still strapped to my chest, its small red light blinking in the darkness like a second heartbeat. I lay still for a moment and listened. The house was perfectly quiet. Outside, the first gray light of dawn had not yet touched the sky. Somewhere across this city, children were already awake, tearing wrapping paper off boxes, squealing with joy, running into their parents' arms. Christmas morning, the most innocent day of the year. I sat up slowly, placed my feet on the cold hardwood floor, and took my corrected metoprolol dose with a full glass of water. 50 milligrams. The real dose. The one that was supposed to protect my heart from the exact kind of stress I was about to endure. I swallowed the tablet and thought about Vanessa standing in my kitchen 3 months ago, quietly switching my pills while the coffee brewed. She had probably hummed a song while she did it. She had probably smiled. I dressed in a dark navy suit, a white shirt with no tie, and black Oxford shoes. A surgeon dresses for the operating room with intention. Every garment is chosen for function, not vanity. Today I was not going to Galveston. I was not going to the beach house. I was not going to stand on my own porch and beg to be let inside. Today I was going to sit in my study in Houston and watch the operation unfold on 16 camera feeds while federal agents did what federal agents do best. At 5:30, I made coffee and carried it upstairs. I opened my laptop, logged into the security system, and arranged the feeds across both monitors. 8 cameras per screen. The beach house appeared in perfect high-definition clarity. The living room had been transformed. White tablecloths covered every surface. A raised platform stood at the far end, with a podium bearing the Caldwell Wellness Foundation logo. Rows of cushioned chairs faced the stage, at least 60, maybe 70. A banner stretched across the back wall, reading, Empowering Health, Transforming Lives. First Annual Caldwell Wellness Summit. First Annual. As if there would be a second. I sipped my coffee and watched the empty rooms. At 6:12, a light turned on in the upstairs master bedroom. My master bedroom. The one with the bay window, overlooking the Gulf. Nadine appeared in the hallway wearing a bathrobe, her hair wrapped in a towel. She walked downstairs and turned on the kitchen lights. She opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of champagne. Champagne at 6 in the morning on Christmas Day. She popped the cork, poured a glass, and raised it toward the living room as if toasting the empty chairs. Merry Christmas to me. I imagined her saying, Merry Christmas to the new life, without the difficult old man. At 6:41, Jerome came downstairs. He was already dressed in a charcoal suit with a burgundy pocket square. He looked nervous. He kept checking his phone, scrolling through messages, running his hand through his hair. He poured coffee but did not drink it. He stood at the kitchen island and stared at the counter, the way a man stares at a clock in a waiting room when someone he loves is in surgery. Good, I thought. He should be nervous. His body knew something his mind had not yet accepted. The instinct of guilt is always ahead of the intellect. At 7:15, Vanessa arrived. She came through the front door carrying 3 garment bags and a box of printed programs. She was wearing workout clothes, her hair pulled back, no makeup. The transformation would come later. Right now, she was the stage manager, the director, the architect of an empire built on my name and my reputation and my stolen signature. She hung the garment bags in the downstairs closet and began arranging the programs on a table near the entrance. I zoomed in on the cover. A glossy photograph of a sunset over the ocean, with text reading Caldwell Wellness Summit, December 25, Welcome Package, with a smaller line beneath it, featuring keynote insights from the Caldwell Medical Legacy, my medical legacy. 41 years of saving lives, reduced to a marketing tagline, on a program for a fraudulent supplement gala. I took a screenshot. Timestamp 0717. Added it to the evidence folder. At 8 o'clock, the caterers arrived. 2 white vans pulled into the driveway, and 6 workers began unloading trays of food, cases of wine, and a 3-tier cake decorated with the foundation logo. I watched them carry everything inside and set up a buffet along the dining room wall. Silver chafing dishes, crystal glasses, linen napkins folded into fans. The estimated cost of this spread was at least $15,000. Money that had come from donors who believed they were funding community health programs for underserved families. At 8:22, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Nguyen. All 3 documents drafted and ready for filing December 26th. Emergency protective order, civil complaint, divorce petition. Review copies in your encrypted inbox. Stay safe today, Franklin. I replied with 2 words. Thank you. At 8:45, a second text arrived. This one from James Whitfield. The message was longer. Operational briefing confirmed. Houston Field Office has assigned a 12-person team, 2 IRS criminal investigation agents attached. Arrival window is between 1,100 and 1,300 hours depending on guest density. We want maximum witnesses. Do not contact anyone at the property. Maintain surveillance only. Merry Christmas, Franklin. Maximum witnesses. James understood something that most people do not. Justice is not just about punishment. It is about exposure. A crime committed in darkness loses its power when dragged into the light, and the more eyes that witness the exposure, the more impossible it becomes to deny, to minimize, to explain away. I set the phone down and looked at my monitors. The beach house was filling up. The caterers were lighting candles. Vanessa had disappeared upstairs to begin her transformation. Jerome was pacing the living room, straightening chairs that were already straight, and Nadine was on her second glass of champagne, sitting in my reading chair, the one they had moved but apparently not discarded, scrolling through her phone with the casual confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. I checked the time. 8:52. In approximately 2 to 4 hours, a convoy of federal vehicles would turn onto my street in Galveston. 12 agents, 2 IRS investigators. Warrants for arrest, seizure, and search. The guests would be seated. The champagne would be flowing. Vanessa would be at the podium, mid-sentence, selling a dream built on theft and poison and forged signatures. And then the door would open. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands across my chest, and waited. The surgeon does not rush the final stage. He monitors the vitals. He watches the screens. He breathes. The operation had begun. The first guests arrived at 10:15. A silver Mercedes pulled into the driveway, and a couple in their early 60s stepped out, the woman carrying a gift bag with gold tissue paper, the man adjusting his tie in the reflection of the car window. I watched them walk to the front door where Vanessa greeted them with a hug and a smile so wide it could have been printed on a billboard. She was wearing a floor-length emerald dress, with her hair swept up and diamond earrings catching the morning light. My wife's diamond earrings. The ones I had bought Nadine for our 30th anniversary in Zurich. By 10:45, the driveway was full. Cars lined the street in both directions. I counted them on the cameras. 23 vehicles, luxury sedans, SUVs, a black town car that suggested someone had hired a driver, the living room filled with bodies, men in dark suits shaking hands, women in cocktail dresses holding champagne flutes. The chatter was loud enough to register on the outdoor microphones. Laughter, compliments, the performative warmth of wealthy strangers who believed they were attending a legitimate charity event on Christmas Day. I zoomed in on faces and cross-referenced them with the donor list Sarah had pulled from the foundation's records. There was Gerald Hutchinson, a retired orthopedic surgeon who had donated $12,000. Beside him stood his wife Patricia, who had written a separate check for $8,000. Near the buffet table, I recognized Linda Fong, a former hospital administrator who had contributed $15,000 after Vanessa personally visited her home with a presentation about childhood nutrition programs that did not exist, children who were never fed, money that went straight to VNC Health Solutions and then into Vanessa's personal accounts. These people were not just guests, they were victims. And in approximately 1 hour, they would become witnesses. At 11 o'clock, Vanessa took the podium. The room fell quiet. I turned up the audio feed and leaned closer to my monitor. "Good morning, everyone," she began. Her voice was polished, confident, rehearsed, and Merry Christmas. "I want to thank each of you for being here today. I know this is a day you normally spend with family, and the fact that you chose to spend it with us tells me everything I need to know about the kind of people you are." She paused for applause. It came on cue. 60 or 70 pairs of hands clapping in my living room for a woman who had stolen my name, poisoned my medication, and planned to lock me in a nursing home. The Caldwell Wellness Foundation, she continued, was born from a simple belief that every person deserves access to quality health guidance, regardless of their income or background. My father-in-law, Dr. Franklin Caldwell, spent 41 years as one of Houston's most respected cardiothoracic surgeons. His legacy of healing inspired this foundation, and though he could not be with us today due to health concerns, his spirit is in every program we run, every life we touch, every community we serve. Health concerns. That was her explanation for my absence. Not that she had banned me from my own house. Not that she had replaced my heart medication. Not that my son had called me 3 days ago and told me I was too difficult to be around. Health concerns. The elegance of the lie was almost surgical. She continued for another 12 minutes. She talked about wellness workshops that never happened. She displayed photographs of community events that I later confirmed were stock images purchased from an online database. She quoted statistics about childhood obesity and senior nutrition that were copied verbatim from a World Health Organization report with no attribution. And then she arrived at the moment the entire evening had been designed for. "Tonight," she said, leaning into the microphone with the gravity of a preacher delivering a sermon, "we are launching our most ambitious initiative yet. The Caldwell Wellness Transformation Program, a 12-month, comprehensive health coaching system that will serve 500 families across the greater Houston area. The total cost of this program is $500,000, and I am thrilled to announce that thanks to your generosity, we have already raised $320,000 toward that goal." The room erupted. Standing ovation. I watched Gerald Hutchinson clap with tears in his eyes. Linda Fong pressed her hand against her chest. A younger man near the back pulled out his checkbook and began writing before Vanessa had even finished speaking. $320,000. I wrote the number down on a notepad beside my keyboard. That was $320,000 extracted from people who trusted the Caldwell name because I had spent 4 decades earning that trust in operating rooms and hospital corridors. Every dollar was stolen. Every promise was hollow. Every smile on that stage was a mask. Vanessa introduced Jerome next. My son walked to the podium with the stiffness of a man walking toward a jury. He read from prepared remarks about operational transparency and community impact metrics. His voice cracked twice. He did not look at the audience. He looked at the floor, at his notes, at the glass of water beside the microphone. He knew. Somewhere deep inside the architecture of his denial, my son knew that what he was doing was wrong, but he read the words anyway, because Vanessa had written them, because the money was already spent, because turning back now meant admitting everything. I watched him and felt something I had not expected. Not anger, not disappointment. Grief. The kind of grief a surgeon feels when he opens a chest and finds the disease has spread further than the scans predicted. Jerome was not a villain. He was a weak man married to a brilliant predator. And the weakness had metastasized until there was nothing left of the boy I had raised. At 11:47, my phone buzzed. James Whitfield. Team is mobile. ETA 12:15. Warrants confirmed. Stand by. I read the message twice. Then I set the phone face down on the desk and turned back to the monitors. Vanessa was back at the podium now, introducing a testimonial video. The screen behind her showed a produced segment with soft piano music and slow-motion footage of smiling families in a park. None of them were real participants. None of them had ever heard of the Caldwell Wellness Foundation. The room watched the video in reverent silence. Some guests wiped their eyes. Some held each other's hands. They believed. They truly believed they were part of something good. In 28 minutes, they would learn the truth. I folded my hands and watched the clock. At 12:07, I saw them. Camera 14. The one mounted above the garage facing the street. 3 black SUVs turned the corner in a tight formation, moving at exactly the speed of vehicles that are not in a hurry, because they know no one is going to run. Behind them, 2 unmarked sedans. The convoy slowed as it approached the house, and the lead vehicle pulled to the curb directly in front of the driveway, blocking any exit. I stood up from my chair. My heart rate spiked, and the Holter monitor registered a brief tachycardic episode. 132 beats per minute. I placed my hand flat on the desk and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way I used to breathe before the first cut in a 12-hour operative night. Steady, controlled, present. On camera 6, the living room was still full. Vanessa was at the podium introducing the next segment, something about a panel discussion on holistic nutrition. The guests were seated, attentive, champagne glasses half empty, programs open on their laps. Jerome stood near the side wall with his arms crossed, watching his wife with an expression that flickered between admiration and terror. Nadine was in the second row, whispering something to Patricia Hutchinson. None of them had looked out the window. At 12:11, the doors of the lead SUV opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, then 2 more from the second vehicle, then 4 from the third. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times. No shouting, no drawn weapons, just 12 professionals in federal windbreakers, walking up my driveway like guests arriving late to a party. James Whitfield stepped out of the first unmarked sedan. I recognized him immediately. Taller than I remembered, his gray hair cropped short, wearing a navy overcoat and carrying a leather portfolio. Beside him, a woman in a charcoal suit with an IRS criminal investigation badge clipped to her belt. They exchanged a few words on the sidewalk, and then James looked directly up at camera 14. He knew I was watching. He gave a single nod. Not a greeting. An acknowledgement. The surgeon in the observation gallery, watching his team enter the theater. At 12:13, the doorbell rang. I saw it on 3 cameras simultaneously. Camera 2 showed the front porch, where 2 agents stood on either side of the door. Camera 6 showed the living room, where every head turned toward the entrance. Camera 9 showed the kitchen where a caterer froze mid-step, holding a tray of shrimp. Vanessa stopped speaking. The microphone picked up her breath, a short inhale followed by silence. She looked at Jerome. Jerome looked at the door. Nadine turned in her chair. The doorbell rang again. Jerome walked to the door. His steps were slow, deliberate. The walk of a man approaching something he cannot name, but already fears. He reached for the handle and pulled. The first thing the lead agent said was audible on the porch microphone. Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have warrants for the search and seizure of this property and the arrest of Vanessa Noel Caldwell and Jerome Allen Caldwell. Please, step aside, sir. Jerome did not move. His hand stayed on the door handle. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The agent repeated himself, this time with a slight forward lean that carried the weight of 12 people standing behind him. Sir, I need you to step aside. Jerome stepped aside. They entered my house in pairs. 2 agents moved directly to the living room. 2 secured the kitchen. 2 went upstairs. 4 remained in the foyer with James and the IRS investigator. The guests sat frozen in their chairs like patients under anesthesia, conscious but unable to move. Gerald Hutchinson lowered his champagne glass so slowly it seemed to take a full minute. Linda Fong pressed both hands against her mouth. The younger man with the checkbook closed it and slid it into his jacket pocket. Vanessa stood at the podium gripping the edges with both hands. Her emerald dress caught the light from the window as she turned toward the agents entering the room. Her face underwent a transformation I will never forget. It moved through surprise, then confusion, then calculation, then something cold and reptilian that I had never seen in another human being. It lasted less than 3 seconds, but the cameras captured every frame. The lead agent approached the podium. Ma'am, are you Vanessa Noel Caldwell, president of the Caldwell Wellness Foundation? Vanessa's chin lifted. Who is asking? The agent held up a folded document. This is a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, distribution of unapproved pharmaceutical products, conspiracy to commit financial exploitation, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The room dissolved. Several guests stood up. Someone knocked over a chair. A woman in the back row began crying. The caterer in the kitchen dropped the shrimp tray and it hit the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. Patricia Hutchinson grabbed her husband's arm and whispered something I could not hear, but could read on her lips. Oh my God, Gerald. Oh my God. Vanessa did not cry. She did not scream. She looked directly at Jerome, who was now being approached by a second agent with handcuffs, and she said 5 words that the microphone captured with perfect clarity. This is your father's doing. Jerome said nothing. He extended his wrists. The handcuffs clicked shut, with a sound that was small and metallic and final. The same sound I had heard thousands of times in operating rooms when a surgical clamp locks onto a bleeding vessel. Click. The bleeding stops. The crisis is contained. Nadine stood up from her chair. She was holding her champagne glass so tightly that the stem snapped in her hand. A thin line of blood ran down her palm. She did not notice. She was staring at the front door where James Whitfield now stood, portfolio open, reading something to a junior agent. She looked at the camera above the fireplace. Camera 5. She looked directly into the lens with an expression that was not anger or fear or shame. It was recognition. The sudden, devastating recognition of a woman who has just realized that the man she discarded was watching the entire time. I held her gaze through the screen. 214 miles apart. A husband and a wife on Christmas Day, separated by glass and pixels and the unbridgeable distance of betrayal. Then she looked away. And I exhaled for the first time in 6 minutes. The agents worked for 4 hours and 27 minutes. I watched every second of it from my study in Houston, switching between cameras the way a surgeon rotates between monitors during a multi-organ procedure. Methodical, thorough, missing nothing. They started with the product. 2 agents wearing blue nitrile gloves opened every box labeled Dr. Caldwell's Wellness Protocol and cataloged the contents. 144 bottles, each containing 60 capsules, each capsule containing 300 milligrams of phenibut. I did the math while they counted. 8,640 capsules, 2,592,000 milligrams of an unapproved neurotropic substance stored in my beach house under my professional name, enough to cause physical dependence in every single person who followed the dosage instructions printed on the label. They photographed each bottle. They scanned the lot numbers. They sealed 6 bottles in federal evidence bags and placed them in a cooler that one agent carried to the lead SUV. The remaining boxes were loaded onto a dolly and wheeled out the front door past a row of guests who were still seated in the living room, not because anyone had told them to stay, but because none of them could bring themselves to move. Next came the documents. An agent with a laptop sat at the dining room table and began imaging Vanessa's computer, a rose gold MacBook that had been sitting on the kitchen counter. Another agent opened the filing cabinet in the guest bedroom that Vanessa had converted into a makeshift office. He pulled out folders, binders, and a shoebox filled with receipts. Every item was photographed in place before being removed. Chain of custody, the same principle that governs the handling of tissue samples in a pathology lab. Touch nothing without documenting it first. Move nothing without recording its original position. At 12:55, an agent found the checkbook. It was in Vanessa's purse, a cream-colored leather bag hanging on the back of the podium chair. Inside the checkbook were 3 pre-written checks, one for $22,000 made out to VNC Health Solutions, one for $8,500 made out to a company called Coastal Event Management that I had never heard of, and one blank check already signed with a signature that was not Vanessa's. It was mine. Or rather, it was the version of mine that she had practiced until the forgery was indistinguishable from the original. The agent held the check up to the light and called James over. They examined it together for almost a minute. Then James placed it in a clear evidence sleeve and wrote something on the label. I could not read his handwriting from the camera angle, but I did not need to. That single check was worth more than a confession. It was physical proof that Vanessa had not just used my name. She had become it. She had absorbed my identity into her machinery and was writing my financial future with a hand that was not hers. At 1:30, the IRS investigator sat down with Gerald Hutchinson in the kitchen. I could not hear their conversation because the kitchen microphone had been accidentally knocked offline when the caterer dropped the shrimp tray. But I watched Gerald's face. He entered the conversation looking confused and concerned. Within 10 minutes, he was pale. Within 15, his wife Patricia was beside him, gripping his shoulder, her mouth forming the same words over and over. How much? How much? How much? One by one, the agents interviewed the guests. Each conversation lasted between 8 and 20 minutes. Some guests left immediately afterward, walking to their cars with the stunned posture of people evacuating a building after an earthquake. Others stayed and talked to each other in small clusters on the front lawn, their voices too low for the outdoor microphones to capture clearly. A woman I did not recognize sat on the front steps and cried into her phone for 11 minutes. She was probably calling someone she loved to tell them that the charitable donation she had made was gone. At 2:15, Vanessa and Jerome were escorted to separate vehicles. Vanessa walked with her chin up, her emerald dress dragging slightly on the gravel driveway, her hands cuffed in front of her body. She did not look at the remaining guests. She did not look at the cameras. She looked straight ahead with the rigid composure of a person who has already begun constructing her defense. Jerome was different. He walked with his head down, his shoulders curled inward, his burgundy pocket square now crumpled and hanging from his breast pocket like a wilted flower. As the agent opened the car door for him, Jerome looked up at the house one last time. He looked at the bay window of the master bedroom. He looked at the Caldwell Wellness Summit banner still hanging above the front door. And then he looked down at his handcuffs, as if seeing them for the first time. He got into the car without a word. Nadine was not arrested. James had explained this possibility during our phone call. The current evidence did not directly implicate her in the fraud or the medication tampering. She was a beneficiary, not an architect. But the investigation was ongoing, and her status could change depending on what the financial trail revealed. I watched her standing alone in the living room at 2:40, surrounded by empty chairs and abandoned champagne glasses and programs scattered across the floor. The caterers had left without cleaning up. The florist's white arrangements were wilting under the heat of the stage lights that no one had turned off. The 3-tier cake with the foundation logo sat untouched on the buffet table, its frosting softening in the warm air. Nadine stood in the center of this wreckage and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The banner, the podium, the empty stage, the evidence tags left on surfaces where agents had removed items. She completed the full rotation and stopped facing the fireplace, where our wedding portrait used to hang before Vanessa replaced it with the foundation banner. She reached for her phone and dialed a number. I watched her lips move. She said 2 words before the other person answered. Franklin. Please. My phone did not ring. She had dialed the old landline number, the one I had disconnected 6 months ago when we switched to a new carrier. She stood there holding the phone to her ear, listening to a number that no longer existed, waiting for a voice that was not going to answer. I turned off the monitor. Some calls come too late, and some silences are the loudest sound a marriage can make. The days between Christmas and New Year moved with the slow precision of a post-operative recovery. Every morning I woke, took my corrected medication, ate a clean breakfast, and sat in my study reviewing updates from my team. The body was healing. The patient was stabilizing, but the full scope of the damage was still being measured. Sarah Nguyen filed the emergency protective order on December 26th at 8:45 in the morning. By 10:30, a judge in Harris County had signed it. The order prohibited Vanessa and Jerome from contacting me, accessing any property in my name, or conducting any financial transactions using Caldwell family accounts. It also froze the Caldwell Wellness Foundation's operating account, which at the time of seizure contained $61,412, money that had been donated by people who believed they were helping families, money that was now evidence. The divorce petition was filed the same afternoon. Fault grounds, fraud, endangerment, financial exploitation. Sarah had drafted it with the surgical precision I had come to expect from her. Every paragraph was a clean incision. Every exhibit was a labeled specimen. The petition cited 34 years of marriage, listed every jointly held asset, and requested exclusive possession of both the Houston residence and the Galveston beach house pending final disposition. It also requested a temporary restraining order, preventing Nadine from selling, transferring, or encumbering any marital property. Nadine was served on December 27th at the Galveston house. The process server reported that she opened the door in the same bathrobe she had been wearing on Christmas morning. She took the papers, looked at them for approximately 15 seconds, and closed the door without saying a word. No tears, no shouting, no dramatic collapse. Just a woman reading the end of her marriage the way a patient reads a diagnosis they already suspected but hoped would never be confirmed. Marcus Delgado delivered his forensic accounting report on December 28th. It was 47 pages long, with 11 exhibits, and a summary that read like an autopsy of a financial corpse. The total amount laundered through the Caldwell Wellness Foundation over 14 months was $217,000. Of that, $133,000 had been routed to VNC Health Solutions as consulting fees. $19,000 had been spent on personal travel disguised as donor outreach. $28,000 had been used for vehicle lease payments on a BMW X5 registered to Vanessa and a Mercedes GLE registered to Jerome. $14,000 had covered designer clothing purchases at 3 Houston boutiques. The remaining $23,000 had been dispersed in cash withdrawals from an ATM in Galveston, amounts carefully kept below the $10,000 federal reporting threshold to avoid triggering a currency transaction report. Structuring. That was the technical term. Breaking large sums into smaller withdrawals, specifically to evade federal reporting requirements. It was a separate federal crime under Title 31 of the United States Code. Section 53:24. Marcus flagged it in red on page 39 of his report. Another charge. Another count. Another year. Added to the eventual sentence. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division formally opened a case on December 29th. James Whitfield called me that evening to confirm. The case number was assigned. The agents had already subpoenaed bank records from 3 institutions: the Foundation's operating bank, Vanessa's personal bank, and the offshore account in Delaware where VNC Health Solutions deposited its consulting fees. James told me the Delaware account held $47,000 at the time of the subpoena. That number did not match the $133,000 that Marcus had traced flowing into VNC, which meant $86,000 had already been moved somewhere else. A second shell, a third account, a burial site for money that Vanessa assumed no one would ever find. They will find it, James said. These agents trace money the way you trace arteries. They do not stop until they reach the source. On December 30th, Dr. Christine Albrecht's toxicology report arrived. The Phenibut capsules contained 314 milligrams of active compound per capsule, slightly above the labeled 300 milligrams. But the report also identified 2 unlisted ingredients. Synephrine, a stimulant banned by several athletic organizations and flagged by the FDA for cardiovascular risk, and sildenafil citrate, the active ingredient in prescription erectile dysfunction medication, included without any disclosure, at a dose of 23 milligrams per capsule. For an elderly cardiac patient taking beta blockers, the combination of Phenibut, synephrine, and undisclosed sildenafil was not just irresponsible, it was pharmacological recklessness that bordered on homicidal. Christine's written conclusion occupied a single paragraph at the end of her 12-page report. This product represents a significant and imminent threat to public health. The combination of an unapproved neurotropic agent with undisclosed cardiovascular stimulants and prescription compounds creates an unpredictable risk profile, particularly for elderly consumers, cardiac patients, and individuals taking concurrent medications. Distribution of this product without FDA approval constitutes a violation of federal law and poses a direct danger of serious injury or death. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I closed the report and sat in silence for a long time. Vanessa had not just been selling fake wellness supplements. She had been distributing a cocktail of hidden drugs under my name to people who trusted me with their health. If even one person had suffered a cardiac event, a stroke, a fatal arrhythmia from those capsules, my name would have been on the bottle. My legacy would have been the headline. Dr. Franklin Caldwell, retired surgeon, linked to supplement deaths. She had tried to kill me slowly with swapped pills, but she had also tried to kill my reputation instantly with a product designed to harm. I picked up my phone and called Sarah Nguyen. I told her to add a count to the civil complaint: product liability, negligent endangerment, and I wanted the FDA report attached as Exhibit L. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Franklin, by the time we are finished, there will not be enough alphabet for all the exhibits." I hung up and walked to the window. Houston was gray and still. The last day of the year was tomorrow. Somewhere in a federal detention facility, Vanessa was sitting in an orange jumpsuit calculating her next move. Somewhere in the same facility, my son was lying on a cot, staring at a ceiling he could not leave. And somewhere in my beach house, Nadine was alone with the wreckage of a Christmas that had become a crime scene. A new year was coming. And for the first time in decades, I would enter it alone. But alone is not the same as defeated. A surgeon who operates solo carries the full weight of the procedure, but he also controls every cut, every stitch, every decision. The year was ending. The operation was not. New Year's Day arrived without celebration. I did not watch the fireworks. I did not pour champagne. I did not call anyone at midnight. I sat in my study with the desk lamp on and the rest of the house dark. And I read Christine Albrecht's toxicology report one more time, underlining passages with a red pen the way I used to underline findings in medical journals that changed the way I understood a disease. At 7:20 on the morning of January 1st, my doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. Sarah was in Austin visiting family. Marcus was on deadline, finalizing the money trail exhibits. James had told me there would be no federal activity until January 3rd when the grand jury convened. I walked downstairs slowly, checking the front porch camera on my phone as I descended. The image stopped me on the third step from the bottom. Jerome. He was standing on my porch in a gray sweatshirt and jeans, no coat despite the January cold, his hands hanging at his sides. His face was swollen. His eyes were red. His hair, which had been carefully styled in a burgundy pocket-square suit 3 days ago, was unwashed and pushed to one side. He looked like a patient who had been discharged too early from a hospital. Upright but barely functional, he had been released on bail. Sarah had warned me this was possible. The charges against Jerome were serious, but the flight risk assessment was low because he had no passport, no independent assets, and no history of travel outside the continental United States. His bail had been set at $75,000, secured by a bond posted by someone whose name I did not yet know. I opened the door. We stood there looking at each other for a long time. Father and son. Surgeon and patient. Accuser and accused. The distance between us was 3 feet of cold morning air, but it felt like the distance between two continents that had once been connected and had spent millions of years drifting apart. "Dad," he said. His voice cracked on the single syllable. I did not invite him in. I did not close the door. I stood in the frame and waited. A surgeon does not speak first during a consultation. He lets the patient describe the pain. Jerome's hands began to shake. He pressed them together in front of his chest, the way people do when they are praying or when they are trying to physically hold themselves together. "I did not know about the pills," he said. "I swear to God, Dad. I did not know she was changing your medication. When the FBI told me, I threw up. Right there, in the interview room. They had to bring me water and a towel. I threw up because I thought about every Sunday dinner when she handed you that coffee, and I sat there and smiled at her, and I did not know. I did not know." His voice broke completely on the last repetition. Tears ran down his face and dripped onto the gray sweatshirt, darkening the fabric in small circles. I listened. I did not interrupt. I did not comfort. I let the words arrive, the way lab results arrive. One at a time, each one revealing another layer of the condition. The foundation was her idea. He continued. "She came to me 14 months ago and said we could build something meaningful, something connected to your name. I believed her. I wanted to believe her because I wanted to matter the way you mattered. You spent your whole life saving people, and everyone knew your name, and everywhere we went, people said your son must be so proud, and I was proud. But I was also invisible. Do you understand what that is like? To be the son of a man everyone admires and to have nothing of your own." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "She told me the consulting fees were standard nonprofit practice. She told me the travel was donor cultivation. She told me the product was a legal supplement that just needed time to get full approval. And I did not question any of it because questioning her meant questioning the only thing in my life that made me feel like I was building something. She made me feel like I was somebody, Dad, and I know that is pathetic. I know it is weak. I know it is the excuse of a man who does not deserve to stand on your porch on New Year's morning asking for forgiveness. But it is the truth." He stopped talking. His breath came in short, uneven bursts. The morning was silent. except for a bird somewhere in the oak tree and the distant sound of a neighbor's television playing a New Year's Day parade. I looked at my son. I looked at the boy I had driven to baseball practice in a station wagon with the windows down. The boy who used to sit on the floor of my study while I reviewed patient charts and ask me questions about the human heart. The boy who once told me at age 11 that he wanted to be a doctor just like me. And then at age 16 told me he wanted to be anything except me. I looked at all of those boys standing on my porch in the body of a 31-year-old man who had just been arrested by the FBI on Christmas Day. Jerome, I said, I need to ask you one question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Not for the lawyers, not for the court, for me. He nodded. Did you know about the offshore account? He closed his eyes. The pause lasted 4 seconds. An eternity in a conversation. An eternity in an operating room. 4 seconds, during which a heart can beat 5 times or stop entirely. Yes, he whispered. She told me it was for tax efficiency. I knew it was wrong. I signed the papers. I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. I absorbed the word. Sorry. A word I had heard from families in hospital corridors after a patient did not survive. A word that carries the weight of everything that cannot be undone. I had spent my career telling families that sorry was not required because medicine is not about blame. But this was not medicine. This was my son telling me he had helped a woman steal my name and my money and nearly my life, and the only tool he had left was a 5-letter word that changed nothing. I stepped back from the door. Come inside, I said. I will make coffee. The real coffee. No one has touched the machine, except me. He looked up. The gratitude in his eyes was so raw and immediate that I had to look away. We walked to the kitchen in silence. I filled the pot, measured the grounds, and pressed the button. The machine began to hum. Jerome sat at the kitchen table in the same chair he had sat in as a child. The one closest to the window where the morning light came through the glass and lit up the wood grain in golden stripes. I sat across from him and waited for the coffee to brew. Neither of us spoke. The machine hummed. The light moved across the table. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness is a long operation with no guaranteed outcome. But something smaller. An opening. A first incision into the scar tissue that had formed between us over years of distance and disappointment and silence. The coffee was ready. I poured 2 cups and set one in front of my son. Drink, I said. Then, tell me everything. Jerome talked for 3 hours and 41 minutes. He told me everything. The first meeting with Vanessa's college friend who had set up the Delaware LLC. The night Vanessa practiced my signature at the kitchen table for 2 hours, using a light box and tracing paper. The argument they had when Jerome questioned the Phenibut supplier, and Vanessa told him that if he could not handle the business, then he should go back to being nobody. The morning she drove to Galveston with the first shipment of product, and stored it in my garage without telling anyone. The evening she opened the offshore account, and told Jerome it was standard asset protection. Every detail was a suture closing an open wound. Not because the details healed anything, but because they completed the picture. A surgeon cannot close a chest until he has accounted for every instrument, every sponge, every clamp. Nothing left inside, nothing unresolved. Jerome's confession was the final count before closure. When he finished, the coffee was cold and the morning light had moved from the table to the far wall. He sat with his hands wrapped around the empty cup, staring at the wood grain the way a man stares at a horizon he cannot reach. I told him 3 things. First, that his cooperation with the federal investigation would be essential, and that Sarah Nguyen would coordinate with his defense attorney to ensure his testimony was properly documented. Second, that his charges would likely be reduced if he provided full and truthful disclosure to the grand jury, but that I could not and would not intervene in the federal process. Third, that I loved him, that I had always loved him, that love and accountability are not opposites, They are the same instrument used at different depths. He cried when I said that. Not the desperate sobbing from the porch. A quieter sound. The sound of something releasing. The sound of a pressure that has been building for 14 months, finally finding an exit. He left at 11:15. I watched him walk to his car, a rental sedan, and sit behind the wheel for a full minute before starting the engine. Then he drove away, and the street was empty again. I washed both coffee cups, dried them, and placed them back in the cabinet. Then I went upstairs to my study and sat at my desk. The monitors were off. The evidence folders were closed. The corkboard above my desk still held the operation timeline. Every cell now filled. Every milestone achieved. I looked at it for a long time. Then I unpinned it, folded it twice, and placed it in the bottom drawer. The operation was over. I opened my laptop and began to write. Not a legal document. Not an email. Not a forensic summary. A letter. The kind of letter a man writes when he has spent 41 years speaking in medical terminology and suddenly finds himself needing words that have nothing to do with anatomy. I addressed it to no one. Or perhaps to everyone. I am not sure even now. I wrote about the morning Nadine and I moved into the Houston house 31 years ago, how she stood in the empty living room and spun in a circle with her arms out and laughed and said, "This is where we will grow old together." I wrote about the first time I held Jerome, 6 pounds and 14 ounces, born at 3:17 in the morning, how his fingers wrapped around my index finger with a grip that seemed impossible for something so small. I wrote about the Galveston beach house and the summer we bought it, how Jerome was 9 years old and ran straight into the Gulf without taking off his shoes, and Nadine chased him laughing. And I stood on the porch and thought, this is what I operate for, this is what I save lives for. So that moments like this can exist for other families too. I wrote about the Christmas morning when Jerome was 12 and gave me a hand-drawn card that said, "Dad, thank you for fixing people's hearts." I kept that card in my desk drawer for 19 years. It was still there. I opened the drawer and looked at it. The crayon had faded, but the words were still legible. A child's handwriting. A child's faith in his father's purpose. I wrote about Vanessa. Not with anger. With the clinical detachment of a pathologist examining a specimen. She was a disease that entered our family through the most vulnerable point. A son who wanted to matter, and she metastasized through every system until the host was nearly destroyed. She was brilliant. She was ruthless. And she had underestimated the one thing that no amount of fraud or forgery or pharmaceutical manipulation could neutralize: the patience of a man who had spent 4 decades waiting for the right moment to cut. I wrote about Nadine. This was the hardest part. Harder than any operation I had ever performed. Because Nadine was not a villain. She was a woman who had spent 34 years married to a man who loved his work more than he loved his presence at home. A woman who had eaten dinner alone more nights than she could count because her husband was in an operating room saving a stranger's life. A woman who, when a younger, more attentive voice whispered that the old man was the problem, believed it. Not because she was evil, because she was tired. And tired people make decisions that rested people would never consider. I did not excuse her, but I understood her. And understanding, I have learned, is the first suture in a wound that may never fully close. I finished the letter at 4:17 in the afternoon. It was 11 pages long. I printed it, folded it into a white envelope, and wrote nothing on the outside. Then I placed it in the top drawer of my desk beside Jerome's crayon card and closed the drawer. Some letters are not meant to be sent. Some letters are the operation the surgeon performs on himself. No anesthesia, no assistance. No monitors beeping in the background. Just a man and a blank page and the quiet, brutal work of opening his own chest to see what is still beating inside. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. January light. Pale and clean. A neighbor was walking a golden retriever. A child was riding a bicycle with training wheels, wobbling slightly, laughing each time she corrected her balance. The world was ordinary. The world was continuing, and I was standing in it. Alive, with a heart that was damaged but functioning. In a house that was quiet, but mine. My name is Franklin Caldwell. I am 67 years old. I am a retired cardiothoracic surgeon. I was married for 34 years, to a woman who forgot I was watching. I raised a son who forgot I was listening. And I survived a daughter-in-law who forgot that the man she was trying to kill had spent his entire life learning exactly where to cut. This is not a story about revenge. This is a story about diagnosis. Every family is a body. Every betrayal is a disease. And every disease, no matter how advanced, no matter how deeply it has spread, can be named, documented, and removed. The question is never whether the surgeon has the skill. The question is whether he has the courage to make the first incision. I made mine, and I am still standing.